welcome to the October meeting of Ellevate's Early Education and K-12 Policy Committee. This meeting marks the kickoff of our 2026 policy season. And as we gather to learn from subject matter experts and policy researchers, we're working to develop our policy positions for the upcoming legislative session, which begins in March of next year. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by staff members from the Kathleen Blanco Public Policy Center, including Dr. Rachel Veron, to tell us more about the Louisiana First or LA First project, which she oversees. It is the it's an acronym for Louisiana's Foundational Integrated Research System for Transformation. It was established via Act 394 of the 2023 Louisiana legislative session. The Blanco Center administers the program, which is a longitudinal data system for public policy research. We're also joined by research scientists Dr. Himani Sharma and Dr. Truck Bowie, who will discuss key findings from the Launch Louisiana report, which is an in-depth analysis of our students' elementary and secondary school to college or career transitions. And finally, we have Associate Director of Research, Dr. Jordan Thibodeau, to speak on their CCAP project, just studying early childhood teacher pay, basically looking at teacher pay initiatives to improve retention. So we are just so excited to have the four of you with us today. And for all of you listening, thank you so much for tuning in. And I'm just going to turn it over for a little bit to Dr. Veron to hear a little bit about LA First.
Thank you, Julie, and I'm very happy to be with all of you today. I'm going to share my screen. All right, you should see a presentation, Blanco Center Research Update. I'm really proud to be here to present the Blanco Center and to be here with my colleagues who have worked so hard on these research projects over the past year or years, and to share some of our findings with you. We know you're very passionate about these subject areas, and we'll show you what we've got. And I'm really excited to share and start out with a little more information on LA First, a new project of the Blanco Center. If you don't know a little bit of the history of the Blanco Center, it was founded in 2019, so a relatively new and young public policy center. And the LA First project has rapidly expanded the center. So we like to think of ourselves in two research divisions, and you may already know some of the key players. So the Blanco Center's executive director is Dr. Stephen Barnes. And there are two research divisions under the auspices of the Blanco Center, and we've kind of recently reorganized this way. Research programs is led by Dr. Anna Oslin, and the LA First Research Project I'm the director of, Dr. Rachel Veron. So as you heard before, we were started by an act of the legislature that created us as the administrator of LA First. And what LA First does as a longitudinal data system is it links existing state administrative data for public policy research. And why that's important is administrative data does detect how individuals interact with state agencies over their lifetime at the individual level. But what longitudinal data systems do is they provide a secure and protected environment to unify these data to really tell a lifelong story about people. And that's really important for public policymakers because really the work is about the land of Louisiana and its people. So in the first iteration, in the first phase of LA First, it involves linking up with our state data partners that were named in the law and figuring out what data sharing would take place. So you see the 7 state data partners listed here: the Department of Education, now Louisiana Works, Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services, Louisiana Department of Health, the Department of Public Safety and Corrections, the Office of Juvenile Justice, the Louisiana Board of Regents, and we even work with local education agencies on data sharing of student personally identifiable information. If you go to the legislation, which I'm happy to link to you all after this presentation, you'll see that it mandates 3 annual legislative research reports, which I'll show you on the next slide and we can talk a little bit more about. Julie already mentioned that we have a Launch Louisiana report and its subject matter. But we're also, we've had expanded authorization, which has expanded kind of our scope of work as well under Act 330 of the 2024 regular session, which allows LA First to be used for ad hoc reports requested by state entities if the data partners agree to it and if there's requisite funding. So you can kind of see a different way of how this relationship works on this slide with the data sharing partners on the left and a rough sketch of our kind of our division of labor within the Blanco Center and what kind of outputs from it. So we have the Launch Louisiana report, which will be the subject today, Louisiana employment outcomes, which is just that, looking at people's employment outcomes in Louisiana after their college high school education, college education, or additional training. And causes and consequences of criminal and delinquent acts looks at linkages between youth justice, adult corrections, and education and workforce. And what's also beautiful, we kind of call these types of systems that look more like ours K K20W plus systems, and that stands for, and sometimes PK20 through 20W plus systems, that stands for kindergarten or pre-K through grade 20, workforce, and the plus element of these longitudinal data system names usually deals with social service programs. So being able to see outcomes through social service programs, of which we have a little bit in our data system as well. You can see that the LA First team is kind of divided into three operational divisions. The administration team, which provides direction and guidance, legal consult, getting the legal people rounded up to do all of these data sharing agreements, to modify the data sharing agreements as needed, is the administrative role, guiding the research program for the legislative reports as well as the ad hoc report queue. Information division is the division that can see personally identifiable information. That's necessary to do. It's a very small division within LA First to link the administrative data for research use and to remove personally identifying information from the files that the researchers actually use to conduct analysis. The information division also works collaboratively with the agencies to receive data on a schedule throughout the year, and it conducts non-disclosure review with the agencies before the reports are released. That gives each agency the opportunity to see how its data were used and to make sure that personally identifiable information is not released and is protected. And generally, the way we do it in our research reports is all analyses we present and release are aggregate analyses. So there's statistics looking at patterns. We might pursue causal research. So those all things are reported in summary. And with that, I'll welcome your questions about LA First and how we are evolving as administrative team. But I wanted to kind of just launch right into our Launch Louisiana report and hand it over to Dr. Boy and Dr. Sharma. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chuk Bui. I am a research scientist at LA First, and today I and Hermione is so happy to be here and discuss some key findings in our first Launch Louisiana report. Before we dive in the key findings, I want to have a short introductions of Launch Louisiana report. This is the annual report focusing on transition during K-12 program, transitions to higher education, and transition to career path. This year, we published our first Launch Louisiana report. We're covering multiple topics, for example, kindergarten readiness, reading skills, enrollment in the higher education, and earnings of high school graduate who didn't enroll in public post-secondary institution in Louisiana. And now Hermione, will present some key findings we found very interesting to share with you guys. The first finding related to reading skills. Can you most so as you know that Louisiana was in headline in this year and last year because we observed the full recovery in the NAEP reading and math scores since COVID-19. We also surpassed the level we reached in the NAEP reading score in 2019. That's an exciting news for us to celebrate. However, in Louisiana, we still have a room to grow in the reading skill, especially when we look at the AA reading assessment result among racial groups. And that's what we want to discuss today. The graph you are seeing is show you the percentage of student on both AA composite benchmarks. So what's the AA? Double A is the statewide measure for reading skill among students from kindergarten to the third grade. And double A will measure multiple subtests, and they summarize on the evaluation with one composite score. If the student composite score on above the benchmark, that means that student more likely to have a positive reading outcome in the later grade. And we try to evaluate calculate percentage of student in this group by grade level, by ratio groups at two different assessment period. The first one at the beginning of academic year 23-24, which is the blue dot, and the red dot will show you the outcome in the middle of the same academic year. And in general, you can see that at the kindergarten level, as a beginning of the year, the percentage of student on above the benchmark is pretty low. However, it will look at in the middle of the year, this number will much larger, indicating the significant improvement in the reading skill for kindergarteners. And it's clear to us that the white student will observe the larger improvement in reading skill than Black student. If you look at the kindergarten between two assessment period, the percentage of student on above the benchmark increased by 24 percentage point for white student. And this number was only 15 percentage point for Black student. We observed a similar pattern when we look at in the first and second grade, but the improvement is less pronounced than the kindergarten. Another takeaway we want to highlight here, if you compare the percentage of student on above the benchmark for what Black and white in the same assessment period, same grade level, the differences get larger and larger when we move from kindergarten to the third grade. For example, in the kindergarten, if you look at the beginning of the year to blue dot, the difference is around under 5 percentage point. But if you look at the beginning of the second grade, this difference would turn out to be 10 percentage point. In this year report, we just do a descriptive analysis. We didn't really focus on to analyzing what factor driving this trend. However, we think that learning about what factor and what the story behind this trend is very interesting research direction for the future study. And now my coworker will tell you another story related to earning of a high school graduate.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask real quick, if you go back to that just for 1 second, Diable is something that is a Louisiana test, or is it a standard test around the country?
It's a standard study around the country, and the score, which is a span mark, will be created by a group author from University of Oregon. So we basically, it's not Louisiana create the level. That is the standard national level.
And so at this point, the research isn't, you're not at the stage yet where you're trying to figure out the why, but you're figuring out the fact that the data exists and there are these differences.
Yeah, that's it. Just only a snapshot of the
Yeah.
two period assessment in Louisiana. So double will measure at the end of the year two. However, we didn't have access to that data in 23-24, but we have a full story about progress for the whole academic year.
And one last question. When we break it down on race, do we also have, and you may get to this, but we had a question, is there the ability to also break it down on socioeconomic level on any possible way?
Yeah, so the reasons why we pick black and white in this graph because we want to show the trend of the two racial groups accounting for the majority of the student population. So in our sample, we got black and white pretty close to each other, around like 40% for each group. And that's why we look at these two racial groups. Yes, of course, the factors of economic disadvantage calculated to these racial groups too, but that is not perfect measurement for it. Will look at that indicator and use racial groups to analyze it. I don't think it's the perfect measurement. We do have the data related on that indicator, but we didn't use our first report.
Okay, and perhaps that'll be in a future.
Yes.
Yeah, makes sense.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. So I will be talking about the linked analysis in our report, where we link data across three agencies, which is LDOE, BOR, and LWC. By linking across these agencies, we study the average quarterly wages of Louisiana high school graduates in the 2021-2022 school year who were not enrolled in a Louisiana public higher education institution between the years 2009 and 2023 and had positive wage records by LWC in the year 2023. I know it's a long sentence, but we linked data across three agencies, right? So we found the information about people who graduated in that school year from LDOE. Then we looked for them in the BOR files, and people who we did not find in any BOR files, we looked for them in the LWC file, and that sample created our entire sample for this analysis. So as you can see here, our first subgroup analysis was by gender, and we saw that the average quarterly wage for the female population quarterly was around $4,000, and for the male population, it was $6,000 quarterly. So I think yearly, if you multiply this by 4, for female, it's going to be $16,000, and for male, it's going to be $24,000. So like an annual difference of $8,000, right? So we just computed this stat in our first year report, but as we move on and progress towards our subsequent reports, we are very interested to know what is leading this difference. Like, what are the outcomes? What are the pathways that these students are following after graduation? What industries they're employed into? But that was outside the scope of our year one report. But as we progress, that is on our to-do list. So, and then we also did the subgroup analysis by race and ethnicity. And we found that the Black workers, they earned the lowest wage, which was around $4,454. And then the categories that were included in the others, American Indian, Alaskan, Pacific, Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander, they earned the highest wages, that was around $6,500. Again, just like I mentioned for the gender analysis, we do not track what occupations they go to or what industries they're employed into. So that is something that we'll be looking forward to in our subsequent reports. So yeah, that was a snapshot of our linked analysis, but we have everything in detail in our Launch Louisiana report. And that was our first Launch Louisiana report. For our second 2026 Launch Louisiana report, we have the following focus areas. We intend to focus on dual enrollment, and we also intend to focus on high school dropouts and their wages. So that is our motivation. That is our goal for the year two report, and happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I believe our committee chair, Cheryl Surratt, has a question.
Yes, I was just curious how, especially if you have a married couple, are you deciding the wages or dividing the wages between two people? I know that used to be an issue of doing these types of studies.
We do not track the marital status. So if we have two observations in the data set, we cannot distinguish if that person was single or married at that point of time. But we are looking at we're looking at a younger cohort. So this cohort graduated in 2021, 2022. So their probability of being married might not be that high because they're about 18, 20 years old. So that's an interesting question, but this is information that we do not have access to in our data right now. Yeah.
And you probably couldn't until they start to show up in the Department of Revenue files, and then you can see if they're married, filing joint, or if they have children.
But that's always been a hindrance in these types of studies, is that when you pull the revenue data to determine who's actually making which income. And so that's always been, my question is, how do you rectify for that when you're reporting incomes from high school graduates or college graduates if they have certain, especially when you start relating it back to degrees and, their educational history.
I can jump in on a response to that. So the linking mechanism for these records is the Social Security number. So it really is about an individual person pursuing education and their wages, and under current data sharing, we get the wage record of an individual, but we don't we don't have a data partnership with the Department of Revenue, and we don't have vital records, which would be your marriage records that would show who might be married. So really, when we're looking at outcomes, if people decide to, what makes it interesting about that is we can see when people leave the labor market for a little while, maybe to care for someone in their family. And that would be traceable to their social and their activity of earning. And of course, the UI wage record kept by Louisiana Works is only W-2 covered employment. So we wouldn't see self-employment there.
And so you're the state. I thought that I saw Department of Revenue on the agencies that you share with, but I could understand that they
No,
would maybe.
not yet, but it isn't totally unheard of among our peers keeping longitudinal data systems. Some departments of revenue have participated in state data sharing. I don't think it was contemplated when the original LA First law was written, and so it's just not a part of it now. But if this longitudinal data system continues to be valuable to the legislature, it might be something that could be added in the future.
And
So
you said you also didn't have the vital records. Because
Right.
that might also be helpful. Is that something you would have to get added to the legislation?
I think so. That would be your, marriages, births, and deaths.
Yeah.
let me ask you if I heard you right too, that you just said that these are only W-2 wage earners that you have information on. So the entrepreneurs and business owners and such as that, we're not capturing them. And so, um, is that what you just said?
That's right. That's right. Mhm.
All right. All right. It looks like we're ready to go to the next section. I really appreciate the information, and I look forward to both of these studies in 2026 for sure.
And we're handing right off to Dr. Thibodeau next, I believe, on the CCAP study results.
Great.
Right, thank you. I am going to present one of the other Blanco Center projects today on the CCAP teacher pay pilot. So first, I want to acknowledge my two co-authors and our executive director, who's the head of this project, Stephen Barnes, and one of my research associates, Eric Mills, have been working on this project and the report. So just a tad bit of background before transitioning. So this is part of ongoing support for the Louisiana Department of Education, where we do some work within their child care and assistance program. That's what the CCAP acronym. This is federal and state dollars for subsidizing child care across Louisiana. And one of the sections of work turned out to be an opportunity for us to study a pressing policy issue being addressed in several states regarding teacher wages. So this is happening during a time of a lot of movement in the economy during COVID, as well as some additional backdrop to this. But we know that quality childcare is linked to gains in childhood in 0 to 4 age children. And so this is hopefully in support of the ongoing work that these childcare centers and their teachers do across the state. So we'll transition to the next slide. And I'm going to present to you the key findings that we have from this, and as well as give you a little bit more background on the study design. So the work was first supported by CCAP federal pandemic relief. So we were conducting this study over a 2-year period after some of those federal dollars had become available, and LDOE had utilized those funds to stabilize childcare centers, and they had some additional money left over from those sources to be able to do something. Well, we partnered with them to utilize the funds for a design study, and that in what we did was essentially an evaluation known as a randomized control trial. So we followed teachers who were full-time at their centers for type 3 early learning centers and gathered 24 months of pay data, their base hourly pay, and the turnover data through repeatedly surveying center directors on a quarterly basis. So the groups of the study that were compared allowed us to look at the effects of providing a supplement to certain centers versus not having that supplement at the director's ability to increase pay. So I should say that all centers who had enrolled in the study were given a minimum of $1,000 to at least fill out the surveys and help us to conduct the research. But two of the three groups were assigned to the intervention condition. And so the first that I'm going to talk about is the 10% group. So that means that on top of their base pay, what teachers at the center in the 10% group were given is a supplement that is multiplied on top of their base pay, hourly pay. So to give you a picture of what that looked like in the data for 10%, that means that teachers could be making about a little over $1 an hour on average, but they ranged anywhere from under $1 to upwards of about $5 increase, depending on what their hourly rate of pay was. The second of the two conditions that were treatment is what we refer to as the 2080 group, which is a standard addition of hours of work for a full-time position. So this literally translates to $1 an hour increase, because what that amount was per teacher was distributed over the entire year to each teacher, such that they got just an increase in their hourly wages. So that sets up this study and design, and I'm going to transition to the next slide to talk about the results. So what do teachers make? In the study, our data show on the left-hand side a distribution. It's a kind of that mountain figure there on the left, that most teachers in the study, full-time teachers, were making $10 an hour. The average wage of the teacher in our study was around $12, and the median wage was just below that. So you can see also that there is some spread in that distribution. So we do have teachers who were a part of the study making on the upper ends of the distribution, upwards of $24 an hour. These individuals tended to be center directors. And so it does situate most of our participants in this study on that lower end of the distribution of pay. So what I've done here on this slide is I want to add a little bit of context to that pay, and you've gotten a little bit of wage earning data from Hamani's presentation. So I think this adds a little bit more context to the childcare industry. So Louisiana and the United States national data are compared there on that upper panel. And at first glance, you can tell that Louisiana is lower than the national statistics being reported. And so it's around 30% lower. And I want to just add to that, one question might come up, that what is this related to the standard of living? You have a lower cost of living. And these data that come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually do control for standard of living cost. And so there may be some slight differences there due to different states. But what we're seeing is that overall, this is a wage issue. And then finally, noting in the study itself, we have, as I mentioned before, we're following centers over time. So we have 533 centers, over 7,500 teachers. We measured their turnover for 24 months, and the estimate that we arrived at in conclusion is 48%. Now, there are some studies out there that have looked at this question. There's even some data, luckily, available on Louisiana and its turnover rate of teachers. And so it tends to be a sector that has high levels of turnover. The Louisiana data is somewhere around 50% for annual. So while we nearly hit that mark in 2 years, we were at about 30%, 30 to 40% within the year that we observed, first year that we observed these teachers in real time. So we can go to the next slide. The main hypothesis is that we're comparing these groups. I want to kind of come back to this. The intervention was to measure a pay increase of about $1 an hour and a proportionate increase. We could look at the variation and how that had a effect compared to a control group. What you're seeing here is the three groups broken down and their likelihood of turnover over their pay. So each graph represents on the horizontal axis the level of pay that we're seeing. Each line is the group. And of course, the vertical axis is the likelihood that they will turn over. Okay, so the relationship that we're seeing here in the data shows us that pay is reliably related to turnover. And you can see kind of the markers in the data call out that there's a few dollars difference between being 50% likely to turn over versus 25% likely to turn over in these three different groups.
Wow.
The major conclusion from our study, which you're probably seeing also in this slide, is that the three groups are very similar, and they were very similar structurally over time. And we measured a lot of different factors, and we found that statistically speaking, the treatment did not result in a boost of retention to teachers. So at the level of $1 an hour, we did not see any movement on any part of the distribution for those teachers that were in this study. That's the main comparison driving the hypothesis here. It is true that we are seeing that pay is related to turnover. These things are, potentially driving each other. What is likely going on at this moment in time that we're seeing in the study is that we're seeing teachers who are being paid more, are being retained more. It's the case probably that many of these teachers are staying for longer periods of time, and then by staying longer, they are being paid more. So it's kind of separating the correlation from causation here is a little tricky, but the important thing about this study is that causally, the introduction of an intervention did not result for $1 an hour in that boost in retention. The final thing go ahead.
Isn't it possible that it's just not enough to move the needle for these people?
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm making $11.48 an hour and I get $12.35 an hour, I still can't afford an apartment and electricity and air conditioning and food and
yeah. Yes, no, it's right up the alley is that question of what is the level that we needed to be able to see this. And there's certainly benchmarks that we can point to, just kind of reflecting back on the data here that we see that, a $3 to $4 difference does give us some sense that there's some movement. But there's also on the lower end of the distribution, a turnover level of, at $8 to $9 an hour, 60 to 70% turnover is still very, very high. And so there are these questions around sufficiency of the intervention and whether or not, other types of similar interventions might produce that effect. So we certainly want to look into that going forward. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just makes me, question if are these jobs easy? These jobs aren't easy to do. They don't you don't leave your workday thinking, wow, that was so easy. I really should have only made $8 an hour. They should be paying me to do this. It's just, I don't get that vibe from this kind of work. And it's just such a question on why as a nation do we so poorly value this work? And then why as a state do we value it 30% less? I know that's not your job to figure out, but it's a really fine question because it holds us back. It's just another limiting factor, I think.
If I may, I might add a couple of things that you might want to engage with as a group that are going on at the Blanco Center right up your alley, I think. And I would like to start just with some events this week. We have a Zoom presentation, a reflection back on the Katrina level reforms in schools in New Orleans with Dr. Doug Harris, who's a national leader, international leader on this subject. We invite you to attend with us. It's a free educational event. And also, if you're in the Lafayette area, we have a wonderful talk with an author, Dr. Andy Horowitz, that wrote a 10-year historical recap of Hurricane Katrina, and some of our Blanco Center employees will be there as well. So we'd love to meet you in person. And please follow us. All of our events are posted on LinkedIn. I think we're on X. And so you can keep abreast. We also have a fabulous newsletter, and that's probably the best way to keep in touch with our reports as published and engage with them with us. Another thing I kind of wanted to mention that's part of our work, especially me, Dr. Bui, Dr. Sharma, have been on the phones with our local education agencies. In order, Himani's linked analysis that showed the wage outcomes of high school graduates, a subgroup of them, was restricted only to those LEAs that had opted in to share student identifying information that enabled us to link the data. And so you can see on this list the largest LEAs that have chosen to opt in as of, pretty recently. Jefferson, EVR, Caddo, but we have some large LEAs that haven't opted in. So right now, by our internal calculations, our data set that's linkable of elementary data represents about 66% of the state's public K-12 students, which is pretty good. But our calculation also shows that the 10 largest LEAs listed here represent an additional 20%. So if they were to sign on, we'd be much more representative of the students. It was envisioned in the law that they be included, and it's just some groundwork, some work at the grassroots to educate local education agencies that this is happening, and to give them instructions on how to sign the LDOE LEA opt-in addendum for our Project LA First. So if your local area is on this list, and you can help us connect with some of the leadership, we're happy to provide that information.
Well, and one of the questions, and I'll turn to Chairman Surratt in just a second, but I noticed that KIPP New Orleans is on there, and all of Orleans Parish is going to be separated into many, many different LEAs because it's a charter system. And what LEA stands for, you need to remind me.
Local education agency.
Yeah. So what percentage of coverage do you actually have in Orleans, I guess is kind of my question to go with that.
I can follow up with you on that. We have a tracker that kind of lists it by parish. So yes, I can follow up.
All right. And Chairman Surratt?
So I was just going to say, I think a lot of the issue with participation is back in 2012, there was a law put in that protected personally identifiable student data, and there was hours and hours and hours of debate in the legislature on protecting this. And I think school systems are very leery of sharing that data because, and on top of it, we pay a huge amount of money each year to get a unique student identifier and not using the social security number. And there's laws that do all types of things that say if we share their data, we have to inform parents. And so I think that there's a lot of leeriness and worried parents, want to protect that data. And I think there's, the laws on the books still leave school systems leery. And so I think that's part of it. And like I said, in 2012, it was such a hot topic, and there was so much debate on it that the school systems don't want to get burned and get accused of sharing data, and because there is still this unique student identifier and all.
So I thought that they made some changes to that law.
Well, they have, and like she said, it in the law, it does allow the sharing, but I'm just saying school systems are very leery on that. And there's also, there's still this unique student identifier. There's still a lot of this about having to notify parents when you share all of that. And so I think school systems are very nervous on that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that we should probably, be looking at to give them some peace of mind as to, how the Blanco Center is going to use that information, because I'm just proud of Louisiana to be moving forward on some good data-driven, research that's giving this access to all these agencies so we can follow these kids and adults. I know that there was one question, and it went in tandem with something that I wanted to ask, and it was on the side of the CCAP, was that, how have other states been successful in raising the pay for early childhood education? And we think especially, in red states, how have we seen efforts to improve that situation that maybe are something that we here in Louisiana can grab onto and try?
Um, so to kind of speak broadly about it, it is sort of gaining as a national attention. So clearinghouses like the prenatal to three evidence clearinghouse are now starting to cite this as a promising direction within the scope of states and policies. So we did this study kind of in the COVID period when there was a lot of movement to provide relief funds and to rehire, but it's been kind of a lot of conversation of states. Pointing specifically to states, there are prior examples of programs that have been done in Tennessee, I believe North Carolina, Virginia, although not necessarily all red states. The general sense of these programs is that they are stipend driven. I think North Carolina might have actually been the only state in recent published programs with data that did increase wages, hourly wages at the time at the lowest levels. I think it was moving up around $5 or $6 an hour. So there are states that are pushing this type of work forward more collectively. And I'm sure that would be available through doing some background research. But those are just a couple of programs to name a few. How they did these things, it varies. Some are attaching the incentive of pay to workforce, career ladder. So a big thing within early child care and learning is providing a pathway for these teachers to move into something more stable. And so providing them with workforce opportunities within their job is part of that. And that's what some of these programs have done. There's only been 2 studies to date, including ours, that have looked directly at cash, indirect assistance through cash like this. So I hope that answers the question by giving some other
We can
information.
look a little bit into Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. One of the things that brings to mind, and one of our members did say something about also, was that, how much of it is that these jobs are being done by women? One of the things that you hear 2 different takes on it. It's like, well, women make less than men because they do things like childcare. And I was probably guilty of saying that in the beginning of my political career. And then by the end, it was like, yeah, but wait, maybe childcare is underpaid because women have always done it. And there just wasn't like, oh, well, they don't really need to make money. They've got a husband. But how many people are out there raising kids and they're single, parent households? So what percentage, and I mean, you may not know this, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what percent roughly of young women without a college degree, especially, are engaged in this kind of work? Do we have any concept of it at all? Oh, look, maybe our chairman.
Paula Polito is on the call.
Yeah.
And I
Yes,
believe she'll be able to speak directly to that. So
yes. It actually those stats are in my manuscript, Julie. So I can't speak to it, but primarily it is women, African American, high school diploma. That is what Louisiana Pathways tells us. That's what the data tells us. And our organizations, it's so complex to get this information because Jordan shared the study here. It's small, private owned businesses. So when we talk about a pay raise, this is not something like a school system can do across the board, right? It's, is this organization or that organization going to do it? But when we think about the influx of the COVID dollars that the childcare industry received a few years back, we were charged with three things. We were charged to increase quality, increase pay, and increase seats. And so I think what you're beginning to see, and I'm seeing this anecdotally, is that those centers who did invest in their teachers and increase pay, you're starting to see those centers see less of a turnover, and those who didn't, you're starting to see those centers shut down. So it is interesting what will happen over the next year, 6 months to a year. But it is, as everything in early care and education, a complex industry with so many moving pieces.
Yeah. So, but do you have any sense of like what percentage, like, is it 10% of women that are in these sort of teacher roles, 5%? I mean, do we have any idea?
Oh, it's 90% are women.
Well, no, what I mean is that of women that are high school education only,
Oh, okay.
what percentage of them are engaged in this early childhood profession?
I can share that with you over the next day or so. I do have that stated.
Okay.
It's in the manuscript. Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because we'd love to learn that. And try to kind of like, I don't know. It's hard to watch some of the early statistics in the LA First about women and their salary differences. And then you hear this, and this is probably just one example. Even teachers in K through 12, when you look at their salaries compared to other salaries for college educated people, are still pretty low. Rachel, Jordan, Himani, Truck. Thank you so much for sharing this information with us today. I really appreciate you guys, and am really excited about some ideas I think that this gives us. I know you guys are the research arm, but we really want to get involved in trying to get some things done, like using this kind of data for brainstorming, like what kind of thing, like what could we do, especially it seems like early childhood is just going to be such an important driver. What can we do to drive better wages, better outcomes? So let's keep the dialogue going with you guys as well.
We love that.
Really excited about what y'all are doing. And it was really great to meet the four of you. So
thank you so much.
All right, guys. Well, we will see you later. And I appreciate y'all so much. Such a pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys. If you're interested in these types of policy talks, check us out on Ellevate Louisiana's website, where you can learn more about our events, our policy committees, advocacy efforts, and how to join. That website is ellevatela.org. ELLEVATELA.org. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.